Good afternoon. I'm Randy Horton, Chief Solutions Officer of Orthogonal. Thanks for logging in today to our webinar on the topic of how to create an agile organizational structure, parentheses, in a MedTech organization, end parentheses. As many of you know, Orthogonal does monthly webinars, monthly webinars to convening industry experts and experts from within Orthogonal to talk about pressing issues and challenges that we're hearing about from organizations in the MedTech world. A couple quick things before we get started. Two quick things. One, we value your brutally candid feedback on the webinar, the good, the bad, and the ugly. So please reach out to us, or if we reach out to you, please answer the phone because we can only learn and make better webinars and improve them with your help. Second thing I'll say is, and we didn't used to do this at the beginning, but people told us it was weird to have a webinar and still not know anything about the organization giving the webinar. So Bernhard Kapp, our CEO, is going to share a couple of brief slides, giving you a quick overview of who we are, which will help you understand why we're doing this webinar. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Bernhard.
All right, thank you. All right, so just briefly, Orthogonal designs and builds digital ecosystems for medical devices, so connected device systems. A lot of the work we do is mobile, cloud, AI, ML, Bluetooth related. We do everything within our ISO 1345 certified quality management system. We work on everything from class 2 to class 3 active implantables, and work in both US and European jurisdictions, as well as Australia and a few other places as well. We engage with people in a couple of different ways, right? We will build systems for them. We will also co-build product while building out digital health capabilities. And then we will enable and improve where someone is trying to build out their own digital health organization or trying to get their digital health organization more efficient. We work kind of across the spectrum from venture-backed startups to enterprise medical device companies, and then work with pharma and non-traditional like tech folks like Ura, Verily, Google, etc. As well, where they are doing medical device work. We are all about accelerating that digital ecosystem development. So strong proponents of agile methodologies, as we'll talk about today, not just within the development cycle, but how that extends, really taking a page out of how cloud providers build their own software in terms of modular cloud native architecture, and then design controls for the digital ecosystem, sort of the right sizing of design controls for different parts of the system so you can be efficient and yet compliant. And then all of this, you don't have a digital ecosystem unless you're trying to do something with the data. So what the strategy looks like in terms of capturing value from the digital ecosystem data faster, both in terms of chain of custody and GMLP, and then building out the AI factory. And last but not least, kind of AI tooling, testing and automation. All of those things allow you to build things much, much more quickly and maintain your ability to evolve your ecosystem faster. That's how we help people.
Excellent. Thank you. With that, we'll get into the webinar topic. We've got 1 hour today, only 4 minutes in. So our goal here is to pack 3 or 4 hours worth of content into 1 hour. And at a minimum, have you leave with a couple of gold nuggets of things you can take home back to the office and use immediately, either for your company or your own career. Please send us questions along the way. We're happy to incorporate them into the discussion as opposed to taking them at the end. We'll be monitoring the Q&A. So with that, maybe Bernhard, if you could introduce yourself, and then we'll have our other two panelists introduce themselves.
Bernhard Kapp, I'm the founder and CEO of Orthogonal. I've been in software for a long time and in software in the medical device space for about 15 years
now. Megan.
Hi, I am Megan Graham. I am the VP of Quality Regulatory at Orthogonal. I have been in the medical device industry over 25 years. Very, very software focused, software engineer by background, really focusing on all different device classifications, regulated, non-regulated, and the pathway and framework to get them on the market and safe and effective.
Excellent.
Larkin.
All right. Hi, I'm Larkin Lowry, CTO of Orthogonal. I've spent more than 30 years at this point in the software product development space, and actually really about almost a full 30 years doing turnarounds of troubled software engineering organizations and helping companies improve and grow their software engineering capabilities. So really have a lot of experience going from the 0 to 1 type companies where they're growing larger and larger teams. I've also have a lot of experience with large teams that really need to just be restructured or change their practices, doing agile transformations and whatnot. So I'm really excited to be talking about at the agile methodology and how to do that, especially within the software as a medical device space and MedTech in general. So it's be a great call.
Excellent. So I think we can start on this because we're going to work our way towards agile organizational structures as we did our prep call. Seems like there's a lot of steps on the way. Let me ask each of you to answer this in a minute or so, which is tell us about your agile origin story, either in MedTech or just in general, if your agile origins came pre-MedTech. And what struck you that, wow, this is different? Or did anything strike you that it was different? I'm going based on the order of my screen. Megan.
So my Agile journey began as a software engineer. I'd heard about Agile, but really started using it 100% on medical device software. So trying to think about how we can go from a largely waterfall framework to something that's highly, highly iterative. And what really struck me as super cool about Agile is the fact that you have that customer in the loop. You're thinking about not just what needs to be built, but how can it work effectively? How can, what does quality look like? Which was very much in my wheelhouse. And so that's kind of my foray into Agile.
Bernhard, on my screen.
I mean, I think I've kind of been, in doing agile software development, not since the early days. I wasn't in the 1990s, but in the 2000s, that's sort of like what we all adopted. And I think for me, the origin story is less about agile and what we were doing there, but the first time we in a previous company encountered the medical device space as an agile company, and so large company approached us actually doing work in glucometers, first Bluetooth enabled glucometer with a mobile app and at the time not cloud, but sort of back end services. And they said, we want to do agile, you do agile, et cetera. Let's do this. And so we did our agile work as part of this. And what we found that was interesting was in terms of dealing with software folks on their side, it was kind of smooth sailing, but everyone from human factors to verification on their side very much had a waterfall mindset, right? And so what that meant was, one, there was not a good match between how requirements and verification protocols and all of those things were written and described and dealt with, and sort of the agile concept of user stories and sort of iteratively building through and learning as you go along. So I would say the biggest thing we ran across was actually with verification protocols, where the verification engineers really only looked at what was going on and looked at the requirements very late in the process when it was time to do verification. And their interpretation of the requirements and our interpretation of the requirements and how to test those things was different, right? And the fact that this happened very, very late in the project caused lots and lots of problems, right? Since then, obviously, we have things like TIR 45 that explains how you use stories and accept user stories and acceptance criteria, and you can build those things into verification protocols. But it was really that, wow, we very much shifted things to things were very much shifted very far to the right that should have been shifted to the left with greater communication early on in the process, but that is not how things were designed. So that was the first time where it's like, wow, we have some some ways of working that are really, really different and that don't allow for best outcomes at the time.
I think Bernhard, you just for everybody's context, we're going back like 15 years to your
Yeah,
introduction to Agile. And back then you had a lot of people telling you you're not allowed to use Agile in MedTech. And I think you said one person said to you, no, 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 it's illegal to do it. The FDA says it's illegal to use Agile.
right. Yep.
Larkin.
Yeah, so my introduction to Agile was outside of the medical device space. I had taken over a company to do a turnaround of their engineering organization. I introduced extreme programming, XP, which was sort of a proto-agile methodology that was mainly focused on just the engineering aspect of product development. So, over a period of time with XP, did get that engineering organization turned around and effective. It was very effective and efficient at producing the wrong features. So we ended up in a situation where, the organization overall felt that, the product development process was effective. It's just our customers were not cooperating, right? And at around this time, the Agile methodology really started circulating and being, rising on people's radar. So we took a look at it and began to adopt it. And it was really life-changing for everybody in the entire organization because what it did for us is it connected the customer through product management into the engineering product development teams, right? We became one functional team. We were breaking things down into increments, but driven by direct customer demand feedback and really a direct translation of that voice of customer through product management into the engineering teams. Suddenly, by reducing our release cycles, being more focused on the value delivery, right, which is what Agile is focused on, we were suddenly delivering features that customers were valuing. Sales started going up. Our retention rate for customers was growing, and it was really that connection between the engineering team and the customer through product management that was the most effective aspect of introducing Agile for that particular company.
Excellent. Excellent. Thanks for those examples. Okay, so let me start with this. Looking back at some of our prep conversation for this is one of the things that struck me is that Agile has amazing potential, right? It done well, it can be incredibly impactful. But in some ways, Agile runs the risk in a medtech company of some of the same risks that quality runs, which is that you get so focused on the trees and the what's and the hows that you lose track of the why and the overall focus. And it's easy to start talking about certain Agile terms like sprints and scrums and miss the, like, are we changing the business? Are we getting customer feedback? So I wanted to ask each of you to reflect on that a little bit. Because that seems like an endless challenge in our industry, mostly honestly because we're so darn regulated that it's easy to get lost in the regulations, I think. So we'll go in reverse order. Larkin.
Right. So, for me, one of the keys really is, as I mentioned before, it's just having that direct customer focus, right? And again, through product management as a voice of customer. What that basically did for us, and why, like, I think companies get into trouble with Agile, right, is like there are a lot of companies that look at Agile and what they see is Scrum, right? They see the performance art aspect of it. They see people doing sprints. They have sprint plannings. They have sprint retros. They're dividing, their work into 2-week chunks. they're performing the mechanics of what they see in other agile teams, but they're missing the key aspect of it, which is driving the requirements and specifications directly from market needs, the expression of the user and business needs. And you'll see often companies get into that mode where the product management team is the guardian and the exclusive communicator, with the actual end users, and the engineering team is only getting what product management is communicating to the engineering teams, and that it just so sometimes you can have very good product management teams that really understand both the customer and the engineering teams and can be that communication bridge. But generally speaking, I feel like it's far more effective to have more of a direct awareness of customer needs at the engineering team level. Just as an example, at one company, we had quarterly business reviews. We would bring in 1 or 2 customers that would come in and do a 10 or 15-minute presentation on how they're using our product, what they like about the product, how it solves their business problems, but also where they have challenges with it, where it's maybe not quite meeting their needs, or what they think could be better about it to better address their needs. Every single time we had one of those sessions, engineers would come to me and say, "Oh my gosh, I never thought of that problem this way. I'm really glad I heard the customer say this. I'm going to think differently about how I'm solving certain engineering problems." And so it does make the engineering work that is done more effective when the engineers have that connection to the sort of the ground truth, right? Because ultimately, that is the only thing that matters.
Bernhard.
Yeah, so I think that there's the things that end up sort of being an impedance mismatch, right, between like an agile process that happens outside of the medical device space and then working within the medical device space, right? Typically in the medical device space, talking to end users, whether those are clinicians or patients, is difficult, right? And seeing and hearing what they're doing is difficult, maybe made too difficult by certain things. And we don't do it often enough as part of the process, right? And then similarly, the way things are designed very much, if you are a hardware company, you're doing much more kind of, it's not an ongoing continuous process the way software is, right? The nature of software in particular is that it's relatively easy to change, to add new features and do things like that. Also, you're doing things that are on top of changing platforms, right? Mobile, the new operating system, new smartphones, cloud backend services evolve. If you stopped working on something 5 years ago, and we have one like this where a customer of ours stopped working on something 5 years ago and now are picking this back up, everything has changed. The language used to develop this is in 4 generations. The Bluetooth libraries are different. The cloud services are different. It's all changed, right? Even if you didn't change any of your features and functionality. But the fact is you're also changing features and functionality. So Agile is, and all of the things around it is really adopted to that, right? Test automation, being able to do changes quickly. That's and while that is somewhat slowed down in the medical device space, because again, very often you have to do regulatory submissions for things, et cetera, but not for everything. It's still something that is moving faster than people are used to, and with more change over time than hardware is. So you need to design a different kind of structure for how the different experts and how the feedback comes in to your process.
Excellent. Megan, I guess I would ask a more focused question on you in this,
Mhm.
which is, you're like, Larkin talked about, and Bernard as well, about sort of what it's like for your engineers when you're in this process. What is it like for your quality, and I guess also for your regulatory people if they're in this process? What's different? How do they experience it, and where's the value?
Oh, that's a good question. So the interesting thing about what works extremely well for, coming at the quality regulatory perspective is you to do that role well, you tend to already focus on outcomes. So you're thinking about what are the outcomes? What at the end of the day, what does good look like? And so you tend to very much align to understanding who are your different customers, stakeholders, users, those kinds of things. So from that perspective, it aligns very well. One of the challenges on the quality regulatory side is that you don't necessarily need to be involved in every sprint. So some of the cadence of the work happens a little bit differently, and you can do it that way. We've had some really good results internally, and we've seen with different clients where you're doing risk management, for example, as along the way with the sprint. That's kind of how it was always intended to be, but it's very difficult to do that sometimes because it requires more time. But it helps you understand and be a part of what does that product actually look like. But some of the work is, you know, uh, there's more of the framework of here's the bottom line outcome that's needed. So what I see a lot in times, and when I learned Agile and medical device was at Medtronic, who eventually ended up writing the standard, the TIR 45 for Agile development. One of the key authors for that is still around, adopted by the FDA, was really more of a mapping of when you're trying to do this thing that the regulatory framework requires, you're really doing it in a highly iterative way. So the structure really becomes the opportunity. And if you know, Agile doesn't prevent you from implementing those practices poorly, right? Like you can still wait until it's too late to have that quality input or regulatory input. But if you have more of a cadence where you're in sync, whether it's every sprint or every couple of sprints or something like that, and you're having that spirit of Agile where you're having the quality regulatory person almost be reflective of one of the customers of each feature, then you start to get a really good, you get that team in sync, and then you're delivering the right things, and you tend to actually deliver them faster over time. So that was one of the things we found that we were surprised by over time is how much more efficient we were at delivering the right things. It was, all of the documentation in the world and analysis in the world isn't going to, and waterfall in the world isn't going to help you being in the right place at the right time and knowing why you're there, knowing what questions to ask, knowing what your data, having something tangible, not just waiting to hear something that might be a problem, being very um, intentional of when is your quality person there, regulatory, and what are they contributing to that. That was where we really unlocked significant productivity improvements. And by productivity, it's like delivering the right thing, not just delivering something.
Yeah,
Yeah,
right. It sounds like you're saying something in parallel to what Larkin said, which is you can get really good at delivering documentation. Does the documentation add value to the quality? Does it actually improve the quality? Does it help your regulation, or is it just we have a higher velocity of churning out pages, right?
exactly. And we were asking ourselves, I mean, we actually did ask ourselves that. That was part of our design for reliability strategy was our title says quality, so who owns quality? What does that mean? And we kind of started from there and understanding those outcomes and then how does that fit into our framework? and having an agile framework to lean on was really, really nice to help display that.
I can answer reflexively, having grown up in Detroit in the 1980s during the quality era. The answer is everybody owns quality, period.
Yeah, yeah. So that no one owns it. Yeah. And
Quality
there's a
is
piece of it,
everybody's job.
and there's a piece, right? So there's a piece. So that's what we got into is what, so you're thinking about the different pieces, who owns what part of it? What does that look like?
We're getting going, and I've got a bunch more questions, but actually, I had a couple of really interesting questions that came in from the audience that are sort of like, we've tried it and it hasn't gone great, I would say is the vein of it. One person asked, I think I'll throw these together. One person asked, like, basically, like, hey, we tried this, it fizzled. I have some ideas about what went wrong, but like, how does one attempt an agile reboot if you didn't succeed the first time to get organizational support? The related question is really interesting is sort of what's sort of minimum viable agile in an organization? How little can you do? Like, can you do agile with just engineering and not quality to get started? Actually, one story I remember hearing from a customer was they said, well, we did agile, but it didn't really work because our testers couldn't keep up. And I said, well, you're doing automated testing? They said, no, we're doing manual testing. I said, well, I could see why you're not keeping up. If you're retesting constantly manually, that's not a scalable process. So how does one define that kernel, or how does one reboot if you didn't do well the first time? Both questions. I'll throw that to all of you.
That's a great question.
Yeah. I mean, this could go a lot of different ways. Larkin, do you want to start, or I mean,
Yeah,
there
I
are
mean, I
many
can't.
ways that it can fail,
Right,
right?
right. Yeah. So ultimately, so there's, I guess, two challenges that a company might face, right? One is it didn't go well, and they think what they're doing now or what the incumbent process was good enough, right? So they're delusional. And there, the only way to help them is to actually start measuring the effectiveness of the process that they have. Now, I have been involved with some medical device companies that had such high margins, they were making so much money that they really just didn't care how inefficient they were, right? And so, okay, you're not going to get, unless they're getting, recalls or something like that, they're really potentially not even going to care. But, most sane companies or companies that where they care about bonuses and whatnot, you're going to be able to show them numbers to say, the incumbent process is not effective. You beat them up with numbers. There's the other category of company though that they know that they are inefficient or they're having trouble with the incumbent process. They tried agile and it didn't really work, but they are still experiencing pain. And so they'll want to try again, but very often what I see is they'll say, well, we need to bring in an outside expert. Oftentimes we tried to do it internally. It didn't work out well. We need to bring in some outside expertise to help us. That can be very effective.
Yeah.
I would add to speaking from a quality professional and thinking about organizational change and changing your approach. Because I've led a lot of transformations. I also taught a class in it. And so over, the several years I was teaching, you're like 20 different student projects. Everyone at their company had to come, the teams would have to come up with here's what's going wrong at our particular company. Everyone's using Agile, or they want to start using Agile. And I would say one of the first things to understand when you're trying to make a big change is what problem are you trying to solve? And how will that change specifically move the needle for the problem you're trying to solve? And sometimes we skip to, I already know the answer. I want to go do this cool thing. And you can do that. But part of the challenge is sometimes uh, maybe it solved the wrong problem, or you didn't quite have that clear objective of here's what we're trying to do to actually make that improvement. And so that's also something to consider is when you're thinking about implementing a new paradigm, you have to also understand that this is going to be changing everything. And some of the problems I've seen is trying to take on too much at once, not really understanding what problem they're trying to solve, not really seeing the link between the problem that's being solved in the specific parts of Agile or whatever your methodologies are that you want to implement, and maybe trying to do things in a stepwise fashion instead of all at once. So that's something I've also seen that might be helpful.
Yeah, so we do a lot of either enablements or helping companies assess sort of the efficiency of their processes and how can they get more efficient with their whatever they call it, their digital center of excellence or their digital product development area within medical devices. And, typically it's a whole series of things, right? Agile methodology and extending it beyond the core of the sort of just the Scrum team, the development team is one piece of it, but there's a whole bunch of things that together are complementary and potentially could get you to 2 to 3 times the efficiency that you have. That's what we typically see as the theoretical maximum. But getting to that is hard because some of those things require organizational change, different hiring practices, different staffing ratios, different culture, et cetera. And so I don't we've gotten people up to, 1.5 times as efficient, maybe 1.75 over a period of year and a half or so. But getting to that 3x, that's really hard, and no one has done that per se that we're aware of, or that we have worked with. So as far as kind of a reboot, there's a couple of things, right? I think there are small things that you can do within your process um, to sort of have faster feedback loops and prevent either rework or late rework, right? That there are things where you can look and you don't even have to call it agile, right? But as an example, right, if you have product management and design, maybe it's an external design agency, maybe it's your internal designers, and they're coming up with all these ideas for the new product, and they're going to the customers, and the customers saying, "Oh, God," and the technology folks are not involved in that at all to sanity check what that is going to take, and maybe there are better ways of doing it that are less difficult from a technological perspective, or frankly, quality and regulatory that say if you do this. So some of it is just have those voices in there in that process early on can save you a whole bunch of headache. Um, there was a nerve stimulation group within a large company we were dealing with that again had that. It was, boy, were those designs really flashy and nice and great functionality. Everyone was loving it. And then when the developers finally looked at it, it was 4 times as expensive as what their actual budget was. And when quality looked at it, it was, I think some of these things are going to put us into a different category for these features, and that's going to be, and honestly, that if that expertise had been shifted left and brought into the process, not like again, a little bit goes a long way. That would have reduced a lot of churn and waste in that process, right? They would have gotten to where they eventually got to much, much faster, right? That's aside from any, agile rituals, etc. That is simply faster feedback and getting the right people together around that. I think that is that is really, if you think about agile in our space, that expertise, that the patient end user feedback is critical, in getting that throughout the process, even though it's difficult, it's worth the effort. And similar with the other things, getting those early on. That'd be the first place I'd start, is where just looking at where you end up with kind of big rework that happens late in the process that's expensive, that requires developers to go do additional things or designers to do additional things or quality regulatory or verification and testers look at that process, and then you can really that's a starting point for making changes. Whether you call it or agile or not, it's less about that than about the overall process.
I would refer people back actually to a webinar we did last year on the topic of how far can you shift everything left? If you shift everything entirely left, you have so many people in every meeting at the beginning that you tip over to the left. It was a good discussion about that balance. And I think, Megan, to some of your point of like, when do you get the right people in the room, and when is it just you got to have everybody in every meeting so everybody hears everything?
And we actually did learn that we actually did learn there was a theory at the time, we should just be there early. And we actually figured out when should we be there and when is too early. And that actually optimized when we started. And that was a huge discovery. Both, I mean, that's a big aha moment, is that it is possible to be there too early.
Right, right.
So we had another interesting question, which said, somebody said, from everything I've seen and read about Agile, in my own experience, a huge part of the success is executive sponsorship, support from the top. So I'll paraphrase their question. What is the ideal customer profile for an Agile executive sponsor? What are the traits you need? And if something's missing, where can you say now, this is not, I can tell you already, we're not going to get there.
I'm going to try to answer that first, because one thing I thought about immediately was you want someone who has pull in the organization, who has something in it for them as well. So they actually understand the value proposition and can advocate for the changes that need to happen.
Yeah, I think for me, like the most critical aspect of a successful agile organization is to split up the leadership into a triad. We call it a three amigos team. Of basically, you have product management, you have engineering, and you have quality. These are the three forces that need to counterbalance each other in order to get successful products landed. And you need to empower your agile teams to have these three amigos leading and directing, the agile teams. But it is not just one group of three; it's layers of groups of three. So each Scrum squad should have their own group of three. A collection of Scrum squads, maybe an entire organization, should have its group of three, and that group of three has to extend up within the organization until you're finally able to reach a point where you have that one single executive sponsor who is able to be influential across product, engineering, and quality. If you don't have a unified sponsor that can influence those three domains, I don't believe you can be successful.
So you got to have somebody on top of those three domains.
Being the enabler, right? Not necessarily the one being the champion of the methodology, but providing the authorization and the power for their organization to affect this.
Yeah, I think there's a push-pull. A lot of what agile and agile-like methodologies, fast feedback loop type things do is they enable decision making at the right level, right, for the right types of things. And so that means you have a certain devolution of decision making, right? It's not like, oh, the biggest decision that the company makes is something that is now, a low level engineer or testing person is making those decisions. No, but they are closest to it if they have the right information and the right other influences there. They can make that decision faster and better than every single thing having to go up the chain to a solitary executive that makes all the decisions. If you have that kind of a command and control structure, then you might as well not do agile. Right? Because and so I think that's one of the biggest things. It does not work if that is the structure that you have. You've got to have a different structure. Because frankly, if it's a command and control structure like that, that tends to also uh, not empower people to make decisions. So if they're not empowered, they're like, well, I don't know how to do this. I'd rather just kick this up to the higher level, et cetera. You've got to be able, like, you're a much stronger organization if you can devolve decision making lower for the right types of things. The way the U.S. Army or the Marines or someone does that. There's a lot of decision making power within bounds for an individual soldier, a sergeant, lieutenant, a captain, etc. Within that, that is how you flexibly deal with things that you can't fully control. So I think that's key. Are you willing to do that? Are the leaders aware of that and willing to do that? And do you have an enabler for that type of thing as well as a sponsor?
How much of that is an enabler as somebody who will give positive support and encouragement, and how much of that is somebody who's willing to roll with a stick on occasion and say, just do it?
It's both.
Oh.
It's both, I would say. You know, I mean, carrot and stick, whatever.
Well,
Whatever.
yeah, I mean, initially, a lot of teams are not prepared for agency, meaning to make these decisions, they have to be trained on how to do it. It requires a lot of structure within the organization, right? Like, you can't expect an engineering team to make decisions and have agency if they haven't been briefed on the mission parameters, right? And have the context of what they need to make the decision based on. So it's really a multi-angled problem to solve, right? You have to structure and train the executives and management to push the right information down, to define the right mission parameters, the guardrails for what decisions people can make. They have to enable them to make decisions. They have to enable them to fail. That is a very critical part of this. Failure is just a part of our daily lives. And part of that management from top down is to give people the maneuvering room to fail without necessarily causing a lot of carnage. But at the same time, you have to train everybody from top to bottom on, really kind of on the way back up from bottom to top on how to receive that agency and act on it, right? To receive the mission parameters, to know what their bounds are, and to be able to fully exercise within the boundaries provided by leadership, right? You have to tackle both sides of that in order to achieve agency. But once you have agency within your organization, you've unlocked a lot of brain power that had previously been locked up in a box.
Yeah.
Parenting.
Yeah. I mean, I would say, one of the things to look at is, right, if an organization is very siloed, right? Um, then that is one of your biggest challenges, regardless of whether it's agile methodology, it's any kind of transformation when you're trying to do something new and different and better, is you end up with, as Lanconi's book title is, silos, politics, and turf wars, right? That happens in big organizations, and there are ways of dealing with that, having thematic goals, and kind of, building out more functional teams, and holding people accountable towards that. If you don't realize that's what you have going on, then just having, the engineering group do agile and no one else is in any way, it's just something that engineering is doing, you're not going to get maximum value out of that. Um, I I have an example where, Larkin, both you and I have been involved in this one in the past, where a medical device company had, mobile apps, had cloud, had web stuff, going on, but it had gotten a little long in the tooth, old architecture, and not necessarily the most modern methods. And you could see, and we see this with lots of companies, where it keeps slowing down. You add more people, but you're getting slower and slower at actually delivering things. It's brittle, et cetera, et cetera. And so this group with executive sponsorship said, let's build a new digital organization and rebuild a bunch of these things and then transfer over to that. That so that was let's build these things new while the other stuff gets maintained. One of the areas there that we were dealing with was on kind of user experience design and human factors, right? And there was a human factors group. They were very much of we do a big human factors study at the beginning, we do a big human factors study at the end, and that's just how we work, and that's how we're staffed. And we were like, we said, well, we actually need to do this more often, especially for the mobile apps and for the patient portals and all of that, because we want to actually both get the user experience right, but there are critical potential use errors as part of this that we have to deal with. So, we look to implement a more design sprints with 3 user Thursdays, feedback from real end users in the during the process. And design folks were fine with that. Individual people on the human factor side, when we brought them in, were perfectly fine doing that work, and it worked well. But at the top level, when we introduced that to the head of human factors, they smiled and said, yes, okay, great. And then they went and complained to management that this was a horrible idea, not with me, and blah, 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 blah. They got overruled because, again, it was championed, and we ended up doing the right kind of things and ended up with a much, much safer product with fewer use errors and better user experience, because we were able to do that. But it took that. If that champion hadn't been there and been willing to do that work, would have died right there, right?
Yeah, I think that HF person had a bumper sticker on their car that said, "You can have my waterfall human factors when you pry it from my cold dead fingers."
Right, exactly. So, and it's understandable from their perspective, right? Because they have a particular way of doing things. They have certain staffing and budgets and et cetera, and how they do things. And now you're asking them to do something quite different from that. That's hard to do, and not everyone's willing to do that.
But in all fairness, that's human nature and how
Yeah.
we incent people and all those good things. Megan, did you have a comment to add there?
No, I'm hearing, I'm thinking, making sure you're understanding all of your stakeholders and how different people are affected, making sure that you have people who feel involved. Those are all things that are really important for any kind of organizational change, no matter what it is. And having that good mapping of your stakeholder analysis and who's going to have the most disruption or who's going to be the most pushback, and what roles, how are we going to do that? And if you don't think about the bigger picture first, you're going to run into different problems, and that might be fine, but you can run into significant problems that are going to prevent you from achieving that objective, that problem you were trying to solve, making really changing that. So all those things. I do see that there's a question in the
Oh, yeah,
in the
another question.
chat about
Let's see. Megan, can you
yeah,
state when you think QA/RA should engage in product development in an
development.
agile environment?
I love this question. We could practically have a whole webinar on this because I have spent an entire career thinking about this question. and challenging assumptions. So speaking from a medical device perspective in particular, before I joined Orthogonal, I spent about 10 years consulting to medical device startups. So working with founders, going from back of the napkin, if you will, concept into launching their business and their first product. And what was absolutely true is that my clients, and sometimes other people's clients, they would then come to me when things weren't working. The most successful ones, and this is true for when you're launching a product, have their quality regulatory strategy as part of their business strategy. So the ones that are thinking about, so whether it's you're launching a business or you're launching a new product line, a new, next generation platform or something, really thinking about both from a regulatory perspective and the regulatory landscape. So really defining what are the riverbanks, for example, what are the constraints of what that product needs to be, but also really, really important is thinking about your quality strategy in terms of how do you need to architect your system so that you're taking a full advantage of the regulatory framework? Because you're not going to have just one product. You're going to have a series of product releases, right? Or you might have an entire ecosystem. You might have different components. And what a component does on day one and release one might be different than what it does on day 3. You might go from it's not a medical device today to it is a medical device. So there's a quality regulatory, excuse me, strategy that needs to happen at the very beginning as you're defining what this business is, product is, whatever you're defining. And then once you have that kind of framework of here's kind of the I call it the riverbanks. We need to stay inside this channel. Otherwise, things change dramatically. You start to narrow in on the focus. That's when you start kind of defining, okay, what is the product going to actually be? And at that point in time, I think that's where quality regulatory perspective is most useful once you've defined your version 1. Like, what is this product actually going to be? Because you can define your strategy, and that's the bigger picture. So having, once like what the product is supposed to be, what are we trying to do? And then I think about risk management separately from other quality. And that's where risk management, you're really thinking about how could it fail and how could it fail in a bad way. That's where you want to be involved I always think, what's the clinical workflow? What's the use workflow? And then ultimately, what's the architecture? You need to be at that stage. Those early steps, being very explicit around what's your overall what do your riverbanks need to be, and what does your architecture need to be? What's the clinical workflow? How is it going to be used? Sets the stage for everything else. And then having, as it's defined, it makes that job a lot easier throughout. And then you're basically just, responding sprint by sprint to, as we're building it out, what are we running into in terms of making sure we're clear, that we're staying within those riverbanks, that we're identifying any new risks. But really, those are the two. And then at the end, all that comes together. So it's really about those two key pieces, having someone, and it might not be the same person. It might be different skill sets that you're looking at. It needs to be someone who can think strategically about your product strategy and look out and think beyond just the, typical, this is how it's always done kind of a thing. You want to leverage what works and you want to think about, where are we treading new pathways so that you can be thinking about the success of not just the first release, but beyond. So those are a couple of areas where it's really, really critical. I've seen that pay off considerably for multiple types of products, multiple size organizations, multiple stages of organizations. That's something that I've been really pleased with those specific objective, not just there in all the meetings, but specific
Yeah.
objectives that you want to achieve at those stages are really, really critical for success.
I think you hit on something, Megan, that somebody had hit on in a recent webinar. The way you described it is one of the variants between Agile and an unregulated environment and Agile in our world is at certain points in our world, there are one-way doors. And once you go through it, it's really hard to go back, your device classification. So you want to basically make sure I think what you're describing is in the touch points before you go through certain one-way doors where you're really going to regret it. Bernhard, you have you, and then we'll do a wrap-up question.
Yeah. So, I think these are, I look at it as a couple of things, right? There are the specific things within the development of a product, but then there are also kind of how you are architecting your quality management system and how your architects for your software and product managers are thinking about their software, right? More generally, right? Because again, there are that is something that that's, I think, really important if you're building more than one product or you're doing more than one release for an ecosystem, is to really have that well structured and the knowledge there for people, right? You're going to be doing an AI algorithm and there's a predetermined change control plan, and not all parts of your system are. Some things are MDDS and some things are class 1 in or a non-medical device in the US, but they're class 2A in Europe, and they're et cetera. All of those types of things, or they may have dependencies on non-medical device things. So having a framework for how you manage that within your both from a quality perspective, how you leverage software segregation per IEC 62304, which is both quality regulatory, but also really heavily, software architecture related. How you think about interoperability, leverage interoperability guidance within your own ecosystem. Those are all important things for just sort of more philosophically and in terms of how you've set up your system and the interactions of people, that if you have that as part of the knowledge base for the organization, that goes much more smoothly within an individual product.
Very quickly, one color commentary or advertisement, which is, again, please feel free to reach out to us if anybody is interested in learning more about how Orthogonal can work with you to build, co-build, or enable your software-based medical devices. Or if you just have further questions you want to talk. All right, I'm going to ask each of you a brief question. I'm hoping you saw it in the Slack last night, because it won't be brief if you didn't. Which is, let's talk about the sniff test. It's easy to get off course on Agile and to focus on the wrong things and to lose the point of the value. So name something that, if you can do either or. It's a sniff test. If you hear somebody talking about X in your organization around Agile, that's a good sign. And if you hear them talking about Y, that's a bad sign. It means you're probably focused on the wrong kinds of things. What are the kinds of conversations you want to be hearing and overhearing? So I will go Larkin first.
The bad sign is if they are expecting the Agile to provide transparency, like that's what they're looking for. Because that's a sign that the company is using Agile as a management tool, not as a product development tool. The good sign would be that management is providing North Star direction versus very specific, specific feature deliverables, right? They're just giving high level guidance. That's a very good sign that they have a healthy Agile team.
Megan.
The bad sign is when I hear organizations that say it can't be done in the medical device world. So I know that's not true. It can't be. It is. It has been for a long time. And so it is possible, and very likely. A good sign is when I hear an agile team who understands they don't have to know all of the technical details of every regulation or anything like that. But a good sign is when I hear an agile team be say things that I consider to be very customer focused, user focused. And usually that means they're thinking about not just they understand how it's used, but how what the pain points could be, what the failure points could be, and can have that conversation as well. So then I know that the team is really thinking about all the different aspects at the same time.
Bernhard, bring it home.
I would say, bad is kind of two directions. I think of this always as like a Venn diagram, right? There's good agile practices that are compatible with regulatory quality, et cetera. And there are lazy agile practices that are not, and similarly on the other side. So when I hear from developers, we don't have to do that. We don't have to document. We don't have to like we're agile. We just go build things, right? So what I'd call cowboy agile, probably not going to work well. And then on the other side, again, a sense of not willing to be involved throughout the process from quality and from other things. Again, that means you're really not working together on things, right? So that definitely smells bad. I think a good organization, like I always look at the sort of the concept of done and what it means for something to be done. And if done is purely an engineering thing, then that's not a good definition. Done has to really involve the other expertise and the other parts of this. And then similarly, if you look at defect rate, if defect rate is purely something that is an engineering, it's a bug, as opposed to, well, we we missed a big risk here, and we didn't catch it until really, really late, like in the market. That says something in your process was not getting feedback early enough and often enough. So really thinking about defect rate not just as an engineering thing, but as an end-to-end value creation metric, and what done means in terms of value creation.
All right. Well, thank you all, and thank you to our audience for joining us. We'll see you next month when we talk about cloud native MedTech architectures for software. And we'll catch you all again. Thank you. Bye.
All right. Thanks. Bye-bye.
Thanks a lot. Bye.